Erev Tov, and a busy week of preparation for Pesach. I think this is a well-timed essay in not being too long or complicated. And ironically, 1 week after Rabbi Foreman's introduction, in which he talked about his intertextual method, we're not really going to see that in this essay. It jumps a little bit, one step removed from the biblical text itself. We'll get a little more of a flavor of his style and tone. I think I said this last week that the text feels more like a transcript of an oral teaching than a written teaching. And I think we definitely will see that clearly this week. And a lovely insight. So maybe a little shorter, and here we go. Parashat Tzav, the four who offer the Todah. Here's what Rabbi Foreman has to say to us. Parshat Tzav introduces us to the Korban Todah, which we might call a thanksgiving offering. And in these pages, I want to talk about something the rabbis of the Talmud tell us about the Todah. So we already see from his introduction, he's going to be focused on a rabbinic interpretation. He'll only make one passing reference to the biblical source text itself, although that will be something interesting to reflect on, separately, the verses that he quotes. In Tractate Brachot 54b, the sages identified four types of people who are expected, perhaps even required, to bring this kind of offering. By the way, these four people map onto the four categories. If these are the four categories of people who are required to bring a Thanksgiving offering, they're the same sort of four categories of people that we generally describe as the ones who are also obligated in Birkat HaGomel, in the Thanksgiving blessing, and various halachic details flow forth from that, from those categorizations. While most of the four seem similar to one another, one seems rather different. And that difference, I think, is telling. To understand why, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite little games, one I first learned back in my Sesame Street days, when I was maybe 6 years old. One of these things is not like the others. The way things used to go back on Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the others was a very simple game. The screen would split into four boxes, each encasing a single item. The music would then begin to play. You may remember it. One of these things is not like the others. And you, the viewer, would try to decide how three of those things were very similar, but a fourth just didn't seem to belong. The Torah seems to beckon us to play one of these things is not like the others quite a bit. We often find the text grouping a bunch of things together, but at face value, while most of those things seem united by a certain commonality, one of the elements doesn't really seem to fit. It seems not to belong. In a moment, we will play a round of the game using the four people who, according to the sages, bring the Todah, that Thanksgiving offering. But before we do, allow me to let you in on a little secret. In my experience, more often than not, the outlier really does belong. It's just that you haven't yet figured out how or why. What I'm suggesting is that sometimes, by including an apparently anomalous member of a group, the Torah is challenging you to think carefully about the underlying nature of the group. What really is the common element that unites all the parts? When one of the elements doesn't seem to fit, that signifies to you that, sure, maybe you think you know the underlying commonality that unites the group, but you don't. Not completely. You're ever so slightly mistaken in your understanding. To solve the puzzle, what you need to do in these situations is shift your understanding of the nature of the group, sometimes just by a little bit. Usually, when you're willing to go out on a limb and do that, all the elements will suddenly fit. We'll just pause here to say again about the style. This is really, I think, substantively different than anything we've ever read, in terms of everybody else pretty much stays to interpreting the text and kind of, third person um, commentary about the text. But Rabbi Foreman wants to engage the reader kind of almost conversationally and with this sort of intimate, let me tell you, let me let you in on a secret. For some of us, it may appeal, for some of us less. But it really is a feature. And again, if you watch his videos, it's very much the style of his videos. And I think for someone who was trying to make Torah accessible to a wider audience and and do that by modeling accessibility and also by trying to sort of show how accessible the Torah is. This is a style which I understand very much. Let's try a little practice round, just so we can hone our skills. Let's try one of these things is not like the others with the first tablet of the Ten Commandments. Here you are, looking at the 5 precepts that comprise the first tablet of the Decalogue. As you do, you seem to pick up the beginnings of a common theme. You might have even learned about that theme back in grade school. It would seem as you begin to read the commands on the first tablet that you are looking at a series of mitzvot ben adam lamakom, commands that govern the relationship between mankind and the Almighty. But now let's test the theory to see if it's really true. Sure enough, the first 4 seem to fit perfectly. The first command is, I am the Lord your God. It is immediately followed by, do not have any other gods before me. Right after that, we get, don't take my name in vain, followed by, honor the Shabbat to keep it holy. All these precepts clearly govern the relationship between people and God. They are indeed mitzvot ben adam lamakom. So far, so good. Everything fits the pattern. But there's an outlier, for there's still one more precept left on this first tablet, and it just doesn't seem to belong. That precept is kabed et avicha v'et imecha, honor your father and mother. Clearly, my parents are here, wonderful as they might be, are merely human beings like ourselves. So what is that command doing as part of this group? Honoring our parents seems to govern our relationship with other human beings. What is it doing engraved on a tablet that supposedly focuses exclusively on our relationship with God? The answer is, maybe we got the nature of the overall category wrong. Maybe the commonality in the commands on the first tablet isn't mitzvot between man and God, but something a little more subtle than that. Can we refine our understanding here? Well, let's see. On that first tablet, we seem to have 4 commands that address our relationship with God, and a 5th that addresses our relationship with parents. Rather than assume that the 5th is anomalous, let's search for an underlying common denominator between God and parents. A moment's reflection turns one up. They are both your creators. Yes, that's right, creators in the plural. We human beings have both a heavenly creator and earthly creators, and the first tablet of the Decalogue adjures us to honor them both. We can begin to see now how a very simple, almost childlike game can, when applied to biblical text, yield a surprising depth of understanding. Consider, for example, how this new understanding impacts our understanding of the 5th and final command on the first tablet. It brings the rationale for why we honor parents into sharper focus. We don't honor them because they're smarter than we are, or because they have more life experience than we do, or even because they're nicer people than we are. Indeed, Jewish law proclaims that one is duty-bound to honor one's parents, even if they are not very wise, and believe it or not, even if they're not so nice. Although in the footnote he acknowledges that there are dissenting opinions about that part. We honor our parents because they are our creators, because they are partners with God in bestowing upon us the mysterious gift of life. We owe them a debt of gratitude that we can never fully repay, and for this we honor them. Once I don't know whether I haven't seen his book on Shemot, and I don't think Devarim has come out yet, but it has the feel almost that this didn't fit into the essay or essays on Shemot, and he really liked this teaching and wanted to put it in somewhere. So here it is in our Parsha as the introduction to the same technique, and bulks up this essay, which is otherwise a little bit shorter than the others. So, but it's a good illustrative example and a really nice point, and worth reading the footnote that he adds here. He says, indeed, in light of this, it does not seem coincidental that in the Decalogue itself, the text promises long life to the one who fulfills the mandate to honor their parents, Leman yarichun yamecha, in order that you have long life. While it is unusual for the Torah to explicitly promise a reward for the fulfillment of a particular command, and I think he says particular command because certainly the Torah promises reward for keeping the commandments at large, collectively, but not individual by individual. In this case, the reward serves almost as a commentary on the command itself. When one honors one's parents, one is acknowledging the importance of those who are the very ground of our being. Thus, in granting that honor, we are retroactively nourishing the roots from which our own lives have sprouted forth, thus allowing our being to flourish more thoroughly. And a little homiletical, he's sort of talking about understanding length of life as maybe a little bit more quality of life or successful life. Um, but I think it's a nice insight. Okay, that's all introductory. Who brings a Toda offering? Sorry that the headers here are in a lighter font. All in all, one of these things is not like the others, maybe a simple game to play, but it isn't simplistic. It can yield decidedly profound fruits. So if you would, please join me in playing around with reference to something that appears here in Parashat Tzav. The four kinds of people who, according to the sages, are obliged to offer a Todah, or thanksgiving offering. We'll just take the verses there for a moment from our Parsha. We have whereas Parashat Vayikra seems to talk more broadly about the prescriptions of the various offerings, Parashat Tzav seems to circle back and talks more specifically from the perspective of the Kohanim, the instructions to the priests about the various offerings. And from within the Shlamim offerings, there's the specific case of the Toda, the Thanksgiving Shlamim, the Thanksgiving fellowship or wholeness or peace offering. And there the Torah says, Imal Toda Yakrivenu, if it's being offered, that Shlamim, as a thanksgiving offering, Vikriv al Zevach HaTodah, together with that animal sacrifice is offered, Chalot Matzot Belulot Bashemen, Ukikei Matzot Meshuchim Bashamen, Besolet Murbechet, Chalot Belulot Bashamen. It gets three different kinds of cakes. We have unleavened cakes with oil, unleavened wafers with oil, and cakes of choice flour with oil mixed in well soaked. Al chalot lechem chametz yakriv korbano, and fourthly, together with cakes of leavened bread, here we have chametz, appropriate to our week of Passover prep. Yakriv korbano al zevach todat shlamav. All that goes on top of the animal Thanksgiving sacrifice. So this is the Torah's brief comment in our parasha about the Todah. And we alluded at the beginning to the idea that the Talmud discusses the idea. Now he's going to expand on it. Who offers it? Rashi, citing a Talmudic statement in Tractate Brachot, meaning Rashi on our Parsha, Rashi on the Torah, cites the commentary in his commentary, cites the Gemara in Brachot that tells us who those four kinds of people are who are supposed to offer the Todah. They are four souls who underwent difficult circumstances and survived. Rashi lists them as follows. Yordei Hayam, those who survive a perilous ocean journey. V'holchei midbarot, those who traverse a desert and survive. V'cholesh nitrapei, someone who falls gravely ill and survives. V'chavushei beita asurim, those who are imprisoned but ultimately freed. So, which one of these things is not like the other? Well, let's look for a common thread, and then we will be able to see the outlier. What at face value is the common denominator between these four people? And when I hear one of these things is not like the other, especially with fours, these days I think about the New York Times game, which I play most days, called Connections, where you have a grid of 16 boxes and you have to group the 16 items, they're words typically, into four categories of four. And often this is the case. You can sort of get three, and it's hard to figure out the fourth one. So that's our challenge. Which of these is not quite like the other? Three of the above seem to pretty neatly converge around a common theme. An ocean and a desert, for example, are certainly foreboding places to find oneself. Parenthetically, he adds, although for strangely opposite reasons. The former has too much water to support life, the other too little. A dungeon is another inhospitable place, a place where someone is cast away and basically left to live the rest of their life in squalor or left to die. Those who successfully traversed a sea or a desert were locked away in a dungeon and lived to relate their experiences. Were plunged into an environment that doesn't readily support human life and somehow survived anyway. So, had the list comprised only those three kinds of people, things would be simple enough. One could summarize the Talmud's teaching as follows. If you traverse a place inhospitable to life and you live to tell the tale, you ought to give thanks. But here's the rub. The list comprises 4 kinds of people, not 3. There's an outlier here, the example of grave illness. Illness is not really an environment in the way a desert, ocean, or dungeon is. Sure, it's true that someone who survives a terrible illness did find themselves in exceptional danger, just as the other people on the list. But still, it wasn't because they were in a space that didn't support life. You can be ill at home, and you're in a perfectly fine place. You just have other things to worry about. Seemingly, this one out of the 4 seems just a bit off kilter. It doesn't quite seem to fit. Or maybe it does. In footnote 6, he says, one might object that the 4 can in fact be united quite simply around the general idea of endangerment, and that the notion of place should be disregarded as a red herring, meaning just because it's true about 3 out of 4 doesn't have to mean it's descriptive of the category. Just say it more broadly, it's about people who saved from endangerment. And that's possible. I can't disprove that contention. Nevertheless, the fact that 3 out of the 4 seem to unite around a narrower commonality suggests that the idea of place may be important, and the 4th example may unexpectedly relate to the idea of place as well. It just requires us to expand our notion of place. And he says, I'd like to propose that all 4 here do fit into a single category. Moreover, seeing how this is so makes quite a difference, for it can offer us a subtle insight into the nature of grave illness. It can help us perceive why the experience of a serious health malady can be so terribly frightening. Why is being terribly ill so frightening? I would suggest it isn't just because such illness threatens us that we might succumb and die. Look, we all die eventually, and so in some strange but comforting way, the possibility of death is something we are forced to learn to live with. No, the fear of illness comes from something else besides just fear of death. And the sages, in connecting being gravely ill with these 3 other elements, are helping us see what that is. A perilous sea voyage, a vast unforgiving desert, and the unknown darkness of a dungeon, there is something about being in these places that, in a deep way, shares a quality with being gravely ill. There is an angst associated with illness that has something to do with place. Indeed, illness, over and above everything else it might feel like, is also profoundly disorienting. To be sick is to feel deep down like one is living in an environment that's inherently inhospitable to life. It's just that this time, that environment is not external to yourself, but internal. It is one's own body. Footnote 7 is also nice, worth reading, where he says that it has to do with place. He says, indeed, the source the Talmud cites for the 4 who must give thanks is Psalm 107, a psalm that describes a terrifying place. It tells of people, Vayagiu ad sha'arei mavet, who have reached the gates of death. This notion of being saved from a place of terror, a place where death beckons, feels common to the 4 who must give thanks. When our own body turns on us, when it becomes akin to foreign terrain, when it becomes fundamentally inhospitable to our living spirit, it is then that we are no longer at home in our own skin. And that is the scariest thing of all. All told, the 4 who give thanks experience a profound commonality. They are 4 who have recovered from the fright of living in an alien space. And when this happens, the Talmud is telling us, one must give thanks. Already coming near the end, he concludes, understanding this truth about the commonality of the 4 who offer a todah can help us understand something else unique about this offering. The Talmud, the Gemara in Menachot, tells us something striking about a todah offering. It is accompanied by an extraordinary surfeit of food, no less than 40 loaves of bread. He explains in the footnote. The Talmud derives this exegetically from Leviticus chapter 7, verses 12 to 13, what we read, taking each of 4 kinds of chalot mentioned in these verses to represent a set of 10 loaves, and then quotes the psukim. And if indeed each of them is 10, we wind up with 40. How the Gemara gets to 10 for each of them, I don't remember, but we could go back and look there. This leads one to believe that the meal that accompanies the Todah is meant to be shared by an abundance of people, right? If you're bringing 40 loaves with your sacrifice, obviously you're expecting a larger group to be eating with you. We might wonder why. Seemingly, the answer is that there is something about expressing thanks. Thanks for salvation from fearsome circumstances that makes us long for togetherness and the company of others. Here we come to uh, align with, I think, what we learned last year with Rav Shai Held and his essay on the Todah about the way in which, when you have something to be thankful for, you sort of have a natural motivation or reaction of turning outwards to sort of pay it forward, and that the Todah was very much not just the Shlamim in general, but the Todah in specific, designed to invite kind of sharing. So he's developing that idea also. What underlies that instinct? The instinct to long for togetherness and the company of others when we're thankful. Perhaps it has to do with the ideas we've been talking about. When we give thanks, we acknowledge not just that we were saved, we acknowledge the terror of what we were saved from. In the case of the Todah offering, we survived being somewhere fundamentally alien to life, a notion that is not only scary, but isolating. If I can't trust my surroundings or my body, usually the most familiar of things, I feel profoundly alone. In offering the Todah, and I would just add, I think even if you're in a group, right, thinking about you might experience a difficult sea journey or wilderness journey in a large group of people, but if you feel unsafe, you sort of fundamentally feel alone. There may be some support knowing others are going through it with you, but I think there is very much a feeling of aloneness even when you're surrounded by others when you're going through a dangerous situation. If I can't trust my surroundings or my body, usually the most familiar of things, I feel profoundly alone. In offering the Todah, we give thanks that we are back home. We are back in the community of humanity. We are grateful for human connection, something that eluded us when we felt we were flirting with the abyss. I wonder then whether this might ever so slightly change our perception of exactly what we are doing when we visit the sick. We aren't just bringing with us words of good cheer or even hope. We aren't just bringing cookies or balloons. One of the deepest comforts we can offer, over and above anything we say or do, is the mere fact of our human presence and our willingness to connect. Indeed, the Talmud in Nedarim 39b teaches that one who visits the sick has the potential to heal them just a bit. In the words of our sages, the visitor can, quote, take away 1/60th of the afflicted person's illness. And the reason this is true, perhaps, is because of this aspect of illness we've been talking about. Coping with sickness is more than just the biological task of living through a difficult malady. It is also the spiritual and emotional task of coping with the feeling that one is like a stranger in one's own body. And that is something the visitor, with their loving touch, smile, or mere presence, can help ameliorate. Indeed, one isn't truly a stranger, even if they walk unfamiliar terrain, if they have company on their journey. I think that's really a profound and beautiful insight that, by showing up for someone when they're not well, if they're open to the visit and receptive to the visit, the idea that if the illness is described as a disorientation, as a feeling of almost the unfamiliarity of their own body, then presenting yourself as a familiar face helps push back against, can potentially help push back against some of that level of disorientation, displacedness, and help kind of restore a sense of some familiarity and reorientation. So yes, before I take comments, just to summarize and say, we went pretty far afield from close textual reading, certainly of the psukim themselves here, but in a sense, a closer textual reading of a Talmudic passage, and armed with this tool, which I think is a useful tool for encountering groupings across the Tanakh and potentially anywhere, but certainly across the Tanakh. If you have a grouping and it doesn't quite feel like it holds together, the suggestion that if, again, one of these things feels not like the other, if we can try to expand our categorization a little bit to include that one, then we can perhaps find a way in which it teaches us something unique about that one and then maybe reflects back on all the others as well. And through the lens of the Korban Toda and its four categories, and the sickness being a little different than a going to a dangerous location, we sort of come back to the idea of sickness as experiencing your own self as somehow an inhospitable location. And when relieved from that, is the cause for gratitude and also for seeking kind of the reorienting force of community. So I think I saw David L. And then Lance and Bracha.
You did. I wanted that. Thank you. That was a really inspiring and lovely reading of the text. I wanted to expand it slightly by citing the late Paul Cowan, husband of the late Rabbi Rachel Cowan, who wrote an article called "In the Land of the Sick," writing about of his experience fighting what eventually was a fatal disease. And I think that I think they really are two different things. One is when you feel that your body has become inhospitable to you, and the other is that you feel that you become anonymous and invisible in society. And
Mm.
that's really what Paul was writing about. It was a follow-on to an article he wrote about the Jewish poor on the Lower East Side and talking about the invisibility of the Jewish poor. But going back to the metaphor of being invisible as a sick person, go through an airport sometime in a wheelchair. Yeah. And find out that nobody talks to you.
Mm.
Everybody talks to the person pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, and certainly there are diseases that make us feel that we are living in a body that is no longer hospitable to us. But at a much more basic level, it's also that our insensitivity to the ill leads to them feeling like isolated and alone within our own society.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Lance?
Number one, isn't this benching Gomel?
Yes, the sort of contemporary liturgical analog to the Korban Toda is the Birkat HaGomel, the blessing of Thanksgiving, and it is these same groups, and that leads to all the questions about if you've flown on an airplane, are you required to say Birkat HaGomel? Is it you flew over a desert, but is it really considered to be dangerous? It leads to all the discussions about what illnesses are are dangerous enough that the recovery from them warrants a Birkat HaGomel, and the other which lots of Talmudic analysis around that, and what types of other dangerous situations that might not be listed in these four would qualify. So yes.
I just want to make another point that I'm physically challenged, and the only way I can walk any distance is with a rollator. A rollator is a wheelchair that the physically challenged person pushes, and it has a seat. So I frequently stop and sit down. And I agree that most people ignore me, but that's not really true. I have had cars that have actually stopped to ask me if I needed help. I have people who wave to me. I have people who stop and talk to me. And then in the street, I do have people who come up to me and talk to me as I'm sitting there, or even sometimes when I'm rolling. So the point there to me is another point that I want to make. I think it's a very important point, and that is all of this discussion, including benching a Gomel, is really what Maurice Merleau-Ponty calls high altitude thinking. It's abstract. It lacks the complexity of life, and in other words, you're talking about situations abstractly, but if you start looking at people individually, you could go on for years trying to figure out exactly what's going on in a situation. It's impossible, actually, I think, to fully understand what's going on, and because we're really overwhelmed, and I can't understand what's going on to a great extent. I certainly don't understand what's going on in the world today. Um, and it's not very pretty. A lot of people are suffering, including me, in terms of the stock market. But uh, let me see if I had another point here. Um, yeah, okay. I think I'll stop right there.
Say something.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all those the personal reflections and insights. Absolutely. Bracha, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm more on the visceral end in this because I was just having the hardest trouble finding the link for the class.
Yes, it somehow fell out of the emails, and I'm making a note now to make sure it gets back in them going forward. So thank you.
And this is a class that I feel that I really like the people a lot. I find they have fascinating things to say, and it's a very warm, engaging environment. And I felt in those few minutes totally shut out of it, as though I never had a chance to be part. That was just in the space of a couple minutes. So it just shows how little it takes to get you off center and to need that kind of reinforcement from other people.
Yes, yes, yes. I was thinking also this the focus on place and journey vis-a-vis illness reminded me, and I just looked it up now of a Gemara that I often think about also that has to do with visiting the sick. The Gemara is interpreting a pasuk in Shmot when Yitro is telling Moshe sort of what Moshe's charge will be in the new system, where there'll be, delegated judges to deal with a lot of the cases, but where Moshe's focus should be is instructing the people the path in which they should walk and the actions that they should do. And the Gemara interprets phrase by phrase that actually there's a lot of different things that Moshe is instructing. Inform them. That has to do with not totally clear the structure of their livelihood, might be, professions. The way, that refers to Gemilut Chasadim. That they should walk, that refers to visiting the sick. In it refers to burial. And the action refers to kind of legal ruling or the straight letter of the law. And that they shall do is going beyond the letter of the law. Lots to unpack here, but it's always stuck out to me that the phrase which is used to infer visiting the sick is asher yelchu, that they should walk. And I think it is true. Certainly, others of these require going somewhere, although maybe not all the time. It's you can do acts of loving kindness maybe anywhere you are, but burial may also require traveling a distance. But there's some way in which I certainly experience this. The journey to visiting the sick is half the experience, because you could have to go to anywhere range of a variety of places, and it's sort of the moving yourself onto the journey, and of course also invites us to think about, as you're traversing that geographic distance, you also need to in some way bring yourself to some of the place that they are in order to be effectively present. And so that the journeying, not here in the context of the essay, was sort of associated with the journey of the sick person, but I think it mirrors to a degree the journey of the person who is coming to be with them, and the kind of sense that even though it's a person who may be familiar to you, there's a different kind of journey that's required when you're visiting the sick. Yeah, Joan and Moshe, please. Love to hear you both.
I appreciated what Lance said and spoke from his own experience. So I'll speak from mine. Obviously, I'm going through a medical situation. So two things regarding place. When you're in a medical situation, and I'll speak up for myself, and I have a couple of friends who have other kinds of problems, in a way you are very limited. So your space becomes more limited, like I can't, well, yesterday we did go out to a wedding and dance, but more or less I stay in, I have to be careful about weather, I have to go with, very limited, there's a lot of limitations. And the other thing I think I do want to say is that certainly in other cultures, family and friends visit, and it's very common. You can see it in a hospital, but I find, and I think because Lance is probably outgoing and I'm outgoing too, but I find nobody comes to visit, and I'm very lucky to have Moshe. And I have two friends They're both women. One has a more severe situation than I do, both of them, and they're alone. And this is very common in our society. And I don't know to what extent the synagogue ever addresses this.
Yeah.
Well, I must tell you that I have the same experience.
You do? Okay, okay,
I'm sorry.
thank
I
you.
appreciate you mentioning it.
Thank you.
Oh, I think that so you agree with me in our society. And I've asked friends, just today, I said to a friend, well, you know, you can come over, we can even go out, we can double date. And she said, oh, well, when you get better, you know.
Hmm.
And that's a close friend. I'm like, okay. They don't
Yeah.
want to deal with it.
2 points.
Thank you for naming that, Joan. I think that's important to say out loud and for us to hear and reflect on. I'm very much taking it in.
2 points. How come a warrior / soldier, don't you think he would be more obligated to bring a Todah?
Hmm.
Right? You know, I mean, I think it should be like I don't know. I can't say it should be like a fifth, person.
Yes. Yeah. It seems like it should be an obvious category. Why does the Gemara not mention soldiers coming back from battle? It's a great,
Right.
great question. It's a great question.
That's number one. It says that when a person visits a six, it takes away like 1/60th of the disease. I calculated coming up to 1.6% of the disease. It seems like 60 people have to visit the person, and then the person would have to be ill, be cured. That's or 17 do 1.7. Another thing, I think there's other examples somewhere in the Talmud. It's like 1 in 60. How did the Talmud or the authors of the Talmud come up with that? It's just 1 in 160, something about like, something that has to do, I think, with meat being,
Yes.
I forgot, but I'm talking about 1 in 160.
Yes. Yes.
How do they come up with that? Figures so minute. They have to
Yes.
with meat.
Yes. So it's a great insight. And so first on the soldiers question, I'm really not sure. I'm curious. And I don't know even in this war, in this most recent war, what the practices have been. I know one of our Chayalim, wonderful Chayalim, Shai Bernstein, said to me at some point, he said, I stopped counting the number of times I think I needed to say Birkat HaGomel from, narrowly escaping injury or death. And so I don't know, in some sense, almost it feels like just an initial reaction. Maybe war, the ubiquity, unfortunately, of armed conflict makes it like almost less rare. And here, the kind of unique gratitude for an unusual situation. Again, illness is not unusual, and maybe going through the wilderness or traversing the ocean actually wasn't so unusual then either. Being imprisoned maybe was more unusual. So I don't know if there's a dimension of frequency. First, I was thinking about, the two of them and even illness, those are sort of not human caused as opposed to war, but imprisonment is. So it's a really interesting question. I want to think more about that and circle back. To the 60 question, I love the question. You're absolutely right. It is a trope in the Talmud, and exactly as you mentioned, 1 in 60th is the threshold for nullification of one material in another, and the Talmud also has other associations. Sleep is a 60th of death. Shabbat is a 60th of the world to come. I always understood it. I don't know mathematically whether there's anything to what the basis of the 60 is. Part of me thinks that it's sort of two central numbering systems, base 10 and base 6. I don't know if the Egyptian was kind of base 6. So it's sort of like, it's one out of two whole systems is kind of like almost the smallest increment that we might imagine. And so the idea behind it is, it's real, it's perceptible, but it's too small to be impactful. It's like 1 out of 6 times 1 out of 10. And so the idea is it's not that we are denying its existence, but we're saying it's too small to sort of be impactful. So it's a taste. I guess it's the way we would say it in colloquially. It's a taste of. When we say a taste of, we mean it's not the real thing, but it gives you a little of the flavor, so to speak. So I think it's, related to that same idea, and therefore the sense of a 60th is it doesn't really take away the illness, but it does something. It evokes something in terms of relieving something. But yes, and I think mathematically, the question was asked, so why not just have 60 people visit? But I think it's a fraction of the fraction. I don't know. I don't remember my math to describe what that is, but geometric I don't remember what the right term is. Back to yes, Moshe. Before we go back to David Allen, I see Debbie also.
Okay, no. So I remember like after 9/11, when I was finally up to go to synagogue, I was living in, I was staying more in the city for the synagogue. So the rabbi said, who was that 9/11? So a whole bunch of people got up. We all said, Ben Skrimel.
Yes.
Because I was there and I did see both towers go down.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Lots of moments that there have been discussion. There was a lot of discussion in COVID whether there should be a moment of a collective Birkat HaGomel when the vaccines came out. These are they're well placed halachic questions because the instinct is absolutely correct. David L., back to you before Debbie.
No, I want to cede it to Debbie, and if there's time, I'll go next.
Okay, Debbie, please don't forget to unmute.
With the 60th, I think it was like we have 360 degrees. It was a part of their math system, like we would say today, 1/1000th of a section. I think that, or that was just their math system at the time. So that was the phrase that they used. 1/60th meant for them very little. And as for the illness, there are many, many books that talk about illness as a strange land. There was a book that I read about a year ago called Country of the Blind, that it's a metaphor that's used very, very often because you are trying to navigate a total new reality, and the rules have changed suddenly overnight.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're physically navigating it, and how you walk, how you get somewhere, and sometimes, and the ground under you is no longer firm. And sometimes that's literally, and sometimes it's figuratively. And the rules of the game might change day by day. So the analogy is spot on.
Great. Thank you. David L.
I think Moshe's question about the returning warrior is a really interesting one. And we do have one story in Tanakh about someone who commits to bring a sacrifice. And it's the story of Yiftach, which either you, Rav Stephen, or Debbie can lay out better than I can, so please do. But it's a story that doesn't end well. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Yiftach will make some pledge or promise, that vow that when he comes back, if he comes back successful from war, that the first thing that comes forth from his household he'll sacrifice, and it turns out to be his daughter, and it's not a good situation. So yeah, it's a good question.
Where's that? Tanakh?
What to make of that? That is in Judges
15.
Yeah, I don't remember which chapter.
Okay.
Rav Stephen.
Yes, Lance, and then
you mentioned Shai Bernstein. Is he a member of HIR?
Yes, he is.
And does he have 2 children in SAR?
He has 3 children.
And was he a lieutenant, or is he a reservist in IDF?
Yes.
Okay, an interview with him. If you click the blue link, there's an FIDF interview with him, which I think is amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's him.
That's him.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that he in this, you'll listen, and he will mention Riverdale and he will mention SAR just in passing. But that was the only clue I had, that he might be. And then you mentioned him and I made the connection.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. All right, so that's in the chat for those who want to click
Yeah,
and watch.
just click on a blue link.
Yep, thank you, thank you. Bracha, back to you as we're wrapping up.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to explain this. I'm thinking of the number 60 in Hebrew is samach, and so I see samach as the circle. So maybe the whole thing with needing the 60 people, like to bring the person back into the circle, kind
Beautiful.
of is what came to me.
Beautiful, beautiful, lovely. Yes, Echad Mishishim, and it is often written in that abbreviation as, Echad Mi Samech, and so you have that visual there. Great, great. All right, a rich essay with a lot to think about and reflect on. And next week will be right after Yom Tov, the first Yom Tov end, so we won't meet, but then the following week we'll be back on. So 2 weeks is the chance then to wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and to appreciate all of you joining as we make our way through Vayikra with Rabbi Foreman, and looking forward to continuing in 2 weeks. Be in touch if you need anything Pesach related or otherwise, and love to Mom and Dad. Looking forward to seeing you here in a few days, and good night to all.
So it's the 21st. All right.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
It's a
night.
very important.
Chag
topic.
Sameach. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Pesach.